Georgia Tech, a double-digit underdog against a top 10 Florida State team, upsetting Florida State with a walk-off field goal. Looking how they did, really frankly dominating that game for a majority of that game. What do you got to call it, Fitz? If it's not juicy, then what was it?
It was beefy. At least the losses on my bank account were beefy.
Too.
Y'all, I can't stress how wrong I was about this game, because here's the logic. And I know that there's been a ton of roster turnover. We can talk about the guys that are in the NFL now this year that were on Florida State's roster last year. That's fine. But you had all year as a program for Mike Norvell to sit here and just preach the same thing. Man, we were undefeated and we got left out, right? There's so much just drama to that. I expected to see this version of Florida State that came out with the thunder of the gods. I expected them to come out and avenge whatever they thought the wrongs were to their program. And I thought, even though the ACC looks bad this year, I thought Florida State might be that great hope that could give us passionate, powerful football, Breneman. But instead, all of a sudden, we realized that they weren't even the most physical team on the field. And that, to me, is just gross for a team that should have had that level of passion coming in.
I thought the thing, Fitz, great point. The thing that disappointed me the most about Florida State was early in that game when they go down the field and score that on their first drive of the game, that touchdown, go for the 2-point conversion. All the momentum in the world is on their side in Dublin. And then they go out and get knocked around all over the field. It felt like there was a chance there for Florida State and Mike Norvell to really play some great defense, get a stop, and that game could get out of hand. They are more talented than Georgia Tech, but the Georgia Tech and Haynes King came to play. That was the impressive part. I mean, Haynes King, you talk about juicy. Haynes King is played like lights out when he was running the football. He was tough. He was gritty. I loved his post-game interviews. Haynes King talking about the team and his teammates and how much the adversity throughout his career has brought him to this point. Georgia Tech was the more physical team on that field, and if you're Mike Norvell, you cannot be happy traveling back to the United States.
How does that happen? That's Michael. How is it possible that you can be out physical? And I know I'm not taking anything away from Georgia Tech, although it sounds like, damn, I feel like I'm doing the bless their heart Southern thing here. But there is a moment for me where Georgia Tech should not, the talent, the depth, all of the things, even in the first half when it was close, I kept thinking, okay, this thing breaks open in the second half because eventually depth wears down. And as depth wears down, somebody pulls away. That just never happened. It was like once Florida State started to get the punch back, they had no idea how to stand through that punch. And that to me, that blew my mind.
Yeah, I thought on offense for Georgia Tech, the differentiator was Haynes King in the run game. Having a tough quarterback that can stick his nose in there, pick up extra yardage. In football, in coaching, they always call that the +1 run game, because you have a quarterback, you had an extra number in the run game, right? Normally the quarterback's handing the ball off and then stepping out of the play. When the quarterback's running the football, you now have an extra hat. And when you have a guy like Haynes King who can take hits and know that he's going to get up time after time after time, completely changes the game. And then Florida State could not run the football and kept putting DJU in bad situations. 3rd down and long, 4th down and long. They kept trying to run the ball on 1st and 2nd down. There was no creativity from Florida State's offense. And I don't care who your offensive line is. If everyone in the stadium knows you're running the football on 1st and 2nd down, you're not going to be able to run the football. And what that tells me is that Florida State's coaching staff doesn't believe in DJU, wouldn't let him throw the ball down the field on 1st and 2nd down, thought they were going to be able to dominate on the ground and just kind of control DJU, let him just be a game manager, and they weren't able to do it and had no solution once Georgia Tech stopped the run.
Adam, I'm glad that you brought up Haynes King, because I feel like the majority of the discourse and the conversation after that game has been about Florida State and how Florida State blew it and how DJ Uiagalelei didn't deliver. And look, those things are correct, but I think that we need to also give Georgia Tech their roses, because it wasn't about Florida State completely just, peeing in their pants and committing those fatal mistakes and turning the ball over. This wasn't a fluke. Georgia Tech was the better team. Between DJU and Haynes King was the better quarterback. And look, I think we all need to be really honest about what kind of quarterback and who DJ Uiagalelei is. We haven't seen him be a great thrower, a great passer of the football and deep balls, and obviously we didn't see that on Saturday. But what Florida State's strengths could be being really tough up front on both lines of scrimmage and running the football. If they do those things well, then DJ Uiagalelei can get the ball into the hands of his playmakers. Don't ask him to do too much. You can dink and dunk. Just ask him not to turn the football over. That's Florida State's formula for success. But they weren't the tougher team at the lines of scrimmage offensively or defensively. They weren't the better team running the football, where Haynes King didn't have to have gaudy numbers to take Florida State down. They just needed to be tougher and run the football. It's exactly what they did. They were the better team doing it.
Yeah, I thought Georgia Tech had the much better plan on offense. If you guys remember some of those explosive plays early in the game for Georgia Tech, they came on screen plays, they came on jet sweeps, they came on easy completions for Haynes King to get confidence. Very different than what Florida State was doing on offense, and they allowed Haynes King. Haynes King didn't have to go win that game with his arm. They had a great plan on offense, allowed him to get confident, and then let him run the ball in some of that exotic QB +1 run game that we were talking about. And Haynes King is patient, he's tough, and he's a winner at quarterback. He's proven that now on a big stage in week 0, and learned a lot during his time at Texas A&M. I like what Haynes King is doing. And your point on DJU, Carolina, I will say this. I thought that this was a bad coaching job by Mike Norvell. I do not think they put him in a good position. I don't think their offensive plan was very good. And if you guys remember, the last drive of the game DJU had in the fourth quarter, they put him in bad situations, ran the ball on first and second down a few plays in a row, and DJU made a huge play on third down and made 2 huge fourth down throws to keep that drive alive and then score the touchdown. Unfortunately, Florida State and DJU didn't get the ball back with 7 minutes left. But DJU made plays in the biggest moments of that game with his arm. I know there's a lot of slander on DJU's name. I know people don't think he can throw the ball down the field, and clearly Florida State doesn't think he can either by the way they managed that game. But I will say DJU made big plays in that game, and I don't think his coaching staff or his offensive line helped him out very much.
But I think you just glossed over something that's really important, Adam, because you mentioned they didn't get the ball back, right? And you talked earlier when you were talking just about confidence, right? There is some level, Florida State's got to look in the mirror and figure out who the veterans are on that team. They're going to instill that confidence. Because what really stunned me is as we got into the fourth quarter, it felt like Georgia Tech was the favorite. It felt like Georgia Tech was the one that was like, we got this. There was no panic. And I expected at some point there to be at least a little mini meltdown, and they didn't, even all the way down to the kick. Like they had a mistake, cost them a few yards, obviously, and they still went out and nailed that field goal. Like it just felt like Georgia Tech was the one that came in as the 10.5-point favorite, saying, as a dabbler, saying that like, hey, this is sort of our game to win. Like I think that's stunning part of Florida State here is that they're going to have to look in the mirror and figure out who the guys are that know how to calm the team down and get that extra play from them. Because it is, you're right, they had opportunities as bad as it was to win the game. They just didn't find a way to get the ball back.
And you talk about something for a defense that is embarrassing is not getting the ball back with 7 minutes left on the clock. I mean that is if you're Georgia Tech, like you think of you're an offensive lineman, that's your dream, right? Can we chew up 7 minutes of clock? And if you're on defense and a defensive coordinator at Florida State and you're Mike Norvell, I mean that's not a good feeling. You could not get a stop with 7 minutes left. Add in the 2-minute warning. I mean, that's an extra timeout you have. Not what you want if you're Mike Norvell. Also, Florida State, not good clock management at the end of the game. Also, went into halftime with 3 timeouts. You never want to go into halftime with the ball in 3 timeouts like Florida State did. A lot of things I think Mike Norvell is going to look back on and not be happy about.
And another thing that I think that defense is kicking themselves over is Florida State had a turnover opportunity. Haynes King got a little sloppy with the football with a bad snap and a bad handoff. And if it wasn't for Georgia Tech's right guard falling on it, maybe Florida State wins this football game. And maybe we're having a much different conversation about how the rest of the season might potentially pan out for Florida State.
But Caroline, you mentioned at the beginning of this, we need to overreact. Mm-hmm. And the only thing I would say passionately to the college football world is remember that this loss doesn't really matter. Like as much as everybody's freaking out, I had a group text with a bunch of my buddies that were like, man, how long till Norvell's on the hot seat? My answer to that quickly is he's not. Because remember that in the new playoff system, every one of the Power 4 conferences winners are guaranteed a playoff spot, a top 4 playoff spot, a home game, and a first round bye. All Florida State has to do is right the ship long enough to win an absolutely horrid-looking ACC this year, and they'll still find themselves as a top 4 seed in the playoffs. All Norvell has to do is figure out how to get this done now, and even if they lose 3-4 games, that could still win a bad ACC. I'm sorry, but like the ACC is not going to be as good as the Big Ten or the SEC. That's not a big hot take. So I just need to remind everybody as you sit here and freak out about what this loss means is modern, current, this year college football. This loss doesn't mean a dang thing.
Yeah, but I'll say, Fitz, that did not look like a playoff Florida State team out there. They did not look like a playoff caliber team. Again, as I mentioned, to not be able to get the ball back into the game, your defense to play that poorly in a big game, to lose the momentum the way they did not look like a playoff team. But as you said, if the ACC goes and beats up on each other, a 9-3 ACC champ is in the playoff, obviously with the new 12-team playoff format. And who remembers in 2014 when Ohio State lost to Virginia Tech in week 1, went on to win the national championship? I don't think this Florida State team looks much like that Ohio State team in 2014, but it's possible. And all you can ask for is a chance.
Can I give you one more ancillary playoff impact of this game, though?
Yep.
And that would be to Memphis. Because Memphis is out there trying to win Group of 5, highest ranked Group of 5, gets into the college football playoff, right? So we got to remember here that the big game on Memphis's schedule is Florida State. So now Florida State loses this game. If their season goes off the rails, Memphis isn't going to get any benefit of the doubt if they beat Florida State. They're not going to get a lot of love if they lose Florida. You know what I mean? Like, so they lose all of the things that they wanted by scheduling Florida State. So Florida State losing actually, I think, impacts the playoffs for Memphis. It takes away any wiggle room for them. They're going to have to win everything, and they're going to have to be competitive, if not beat this version of Florida State, if they want to be the highest ranked Group of 5. That's the weird trickle down of all of this.
And even it affects the rest of the ACC, obviously, when we look at the hierarchy of the conference. But like you just mentioned, Fitz, the ACC doesn't look like any sort of gauntlet. Every single big game is important for all of these college football playoff hopeful ACC teams. Look at Clemson. It's not like Clemson has the most difficult schedule in the world. I understand that they open up the season with Georgia. That's a game that we'll get into a little bit later on. But the rest of the ACC also depends on the big-time players and the strong teams in the ACC to strengthen their own resumes. So it only kind of dilutes the rest of the conference. And I will say, this loss doesn't matter. It doesn't not matter, rather. It just makes every other game on Florida State's schedule that much more important. You turn around in week 3 and lose to Memphis at home, which I don't think is a crazy scenario based off of how Florida State looked and how their strength didn't look like their strength, and that was the defensive line on Saturday against Georgia Tech. So we could be looking at a 1-2, 1-3 Florida State team in week 2 or week 3, and that was not on my bingo card to start this season.